definitely first time to this meeting. It's been enjoyable so far, and I appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to talk to you folks. I'm going to talk a bit about a number of things that we've been learning over the last few years with resistance. I'm going to focus on Palmer Amaranth. Our big challenges in herbicide-resistant weeds include horseweed and common ragweed as well. And especially with the horseweed, I kind of figured I'd be preaching to the choir. You guys have been fighting that challenge for some time. I could probably learn more from you than you would learn from me. And the ragweed, same thing. It's something we've both been fighting. The Palmer Amaranth is something that seems to be moving up on you guys and trying to give you guys some insight on things that I wish we'd have known when it was first coming into our area. And really what we're getting to with this resistance is summed up nicely in this comic, okay? What you got, your little greenhouse here with three of these guys. First guy says, super weeds, they're becoming resistant to herbicides. And the other guy says, that's scary, right? And he goes, you mean like this little guy here? And he goes, yep. He pulls it up laughing, says, still scared? He goes, yeah, manual labor scares the pants off of me, right? And that's where we are. We're getting to the point, we're going to be pulling weeds. He's not laughing anymore, left holding that plant. Palmer is really the weed that got that superweed term coined, right? There's a New York Times article. And what makes it such a bad weed? And one of the things, as we were coming into resistance in 2004 and 5, we didn't really have time to look back at the biology of Palmer Amaranth. What makes it tick? What makes it such a good weed, so perfect? We were just concerned about trying to manage it. We were behind the 8 ball, and we needed to get our growers on top of stuff. So a lot of this stuff we've picked up along the way, doing some more research between Georgia, Tennessee, NC State, and others, really trying to figure out what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, what can we do to get ahead of it. First off, it's extremely heat and drought tolerant, high photosynthetic capacity, rapid growth with a large stature. You can see this here. It's about a 30-gallon drum. You can see the label is blocked out, but you can imagine the statement the grower was trying to make in about 2005. What label's probably on there. Very prolific, and resistance trait is transferred through pollen. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little more depth so that maybe you can grab onto something as Palmer's coming into the area to give you an advantage. This heat and drought tolerance comes because Palmer is native to the Sonoran Desert down there in the southwest, right? So you got Arizona, California, down into Mexico. That's its native range. Comes from a desert, all right? This one right here, optimum temperature for photosynthesis for Palmer is 108 degrees. Okay, that's the optimum photosynthesis with Palmer. Think about our crops that we grow. What happens when we hit about 90, 95? They're done. Right? They shut her down, say, I'm going to die if I keep going. Palmer says, man, let's turn the temperature up. Let's keep going. Turn it up to 108. That's optimum. While all our crops have shut down in the summer heat, Palmer keeps growing. Part of that is because it has an extensive root system. On a big plant, there's many times I've pulled them up, and if I pull it up here, I can cross 2 or 3 crop rows to the end of that root where it breaks off. Usually you don't find the end of that root. And so it really sends its roots all over, and it has a big sphere of influence on where it pulls water and nutrients. The other thing is it adjusts its osmotic leaf properties. So it decreases water potential and makes it able to keep going at 108 degrees photosynthesizing. When we look at it, now these numbers, these are micromoles of CO2 per meter squared per second, right? who cares what that means? Just look at the number up front, right? Palmer, 60 to 80, right? Our cotton and soybeans, 35 to 45. Corn and sorghum, 50 to 60, all right? Our crops that capture photosynthetic activity the best plateau out at 60. That's the bottom range of Palmer. It is better at photosynthesis than all of our crops, okay? Then you throw in that rapid growth and large stature. It all ties in together to give it an advantage. This picture has been used a lot. You may have seen it, may not. What happened was this guy stuck a stake in the ground the 6th of July, 3 p.m. That Palmer was that tall. Came back 2 days later, 52 hours at 7 p.m. The Palmer was this tall. It had grown 4 inches in a little over 2 days. Where this is a challenge for us is in scouting, okay? Let's say you go out and scout today. How many of you guys can cover all your acres in 2 days? 1 day. That plant grew 4 inches in 2 days, 2 inches a day. If that was at 3 inches tall, that's a labeled application for most of our herbicides. If you sprayed that day, you're in good shape. If you waited a day, that plant's already too big. You wait 2 days, you're probably not going to kill it. I liken this to cutting rates, right? If you think you're spraying a 3 or 4 inch plant and instead you're spraying a 6 or 8 inch plant, that's not a labeled application. That's a cut rate. There's a higher rate that'll kill that plant. It's probably not legal, it's probably not labeled, but what you're doing is you're using a cut rate and you're only killing a percentage of those plants and you're selecting for resistance down the road. This Palmer grows crazy, right? This is cotton. It's pretty rank cotton. If you've ever been in cotton, it shouldn't really be shoulder high. You like to keep it fairly short. They didn't do a good job managing it, but that Palmer is probably about 9 foot tall, 10 foot tall. This here is a quarter at the base of that Palmer stem. If you think that seed, I mean, it goes from about the size of a fleck of pepper, right, to that in one season, right? It's pretty amazing, the growth rate. This is a field, actually was planted to a crop. I can't even tell you what crop it was anymore, I don't remember. But essentially, complete total loss. It can take over a field, it can become a huge problem and be a challenge in a short period of time. I put red root pigweed on here because this is one that we're familiar with, as well as smooth pigweed and maybe Powell amaranth, depending where you're at. The difference in Palmer from these is these have a hairy stem. As we go through, red root and smooth, even though it's called smooth pigweed, it does have hairs on the stem. If you get down and look at it, they'll be hairy on the stem. They'll have kind of an egg-shaped leaf, kind of a rough feel to it, almost sandpapery, and a single spike seed head, right? You don't have a bunch of branches unless you chopped off the top here chemically or physically. Short petioles, if you break this off at the stem and fold it off, it'll stop about a quarter to halfway down that leaf. Again, all the flowers are in that one head. Male, it's all monoecious, not dioecious. Palmer is different in a number of different ways. First off, it's got a smooth stem. There are no hairs on that stem. When you look at the leaves, they're more lanceolate, long, they're thinner than they are wide, and long petioles, right? If you break that petiole off there at the stem, fold it right here at the base of the leaf, that petiole is going to be about the length of the leaf, or maybe longer. It's not 100%, it's not every leaf on the plant, but the older leaves are more likely to have that. It's just one more thing to look for. The other thing is it gets seed heads, which at this point, hopefully you're just pulling it out of the ground anyway, but it gets multiple branches. It's not just a single seed head sitting up. there's male flowers and female flowers on these plants. It's dioecious, so one has all the male flowers and all the pollen, and the other has all the seed production. The female plants, this will be pretty soft on the male. On the female, it'll be kind of prickly to the touch. You'll feel it when you grab it. Hit the wrong button. All right. It's also very prolific, right? So it's got these two different seed heads. A study was done in Georgia where they grew palmer in competition with cotton, right? And a single plant grown in competition with cotton was able to produce 450,000 seeds. One plant in competition. It wasn't like it was just sitting there, nothing around it, as much water or fertilizer as it wants. It was growing in competition with that cotton. That is equivalent to 10 seed per square foot spread over a whole acre. I'll say that again because I think it's important. One plant can produce enough seed to put 10 per square foot over a whole acre. All right? That's pretty scary on how much seed they can produce. It doesn't take long to get into a situation that looks like this. It doesn't matter if it's a soybean combine or a cotton picker. When you have a scenario like this, after about 3 or 4 years of palmer being in your field and kind of saying, I'll take care of it next year, I'll figure it out, you have a choice. You've got a crop in here you can harvest, but you have a lot of weed seeds that you're going to take into that combine and potentially spread. Are you going to harvest that crop and salvage what you can, or are you going to mow it down and say, I don't want to spread these seeds around? Everybody's going to pick the same choice, right? You're going to harvest that crop. You're not going to leave money in that field. So what we have to do is avoid this happening, and if we do get this situation, how do we use its biology against it, right? And so that's some of the things that I'm going to try to bring up here, because this was a common sight in 2007 and 8. We've gotten away from fields that look this bad in most of our region. Before it gets that bad, it'll look this bad. Usually you get 1 or 2 plants that'll start, and then it'll be about the size of a pickup truck or maybe a tractor trailer the next year, then a pole barn, and then it'll start taking over sections of the field. And you can see it probably started back here along this tree line and is moving out. And you got individual plants a little further away. It might move with wildlife. There's some work that shows ducks and geese can move it. I'm about convinced it moves with doves in North Carolina. Some of the best dove fields I've ever seen were just pure stands of palmer that they didn't manage and then mowed 3 days before dove season. No joke, I saw flocks of 100+ doves over those fields. I know it moves with them, but I haven't done the work to prove it. But definitely getting some help from the wildlife. So what we need to think about, we got one plant out here in this field. It's real easy to say, I don't have palmer, I've got red root. We just missed it, right? It was under the canopy, it came up after. I'm not walking out in the middle of that field to pull that plant. It only takes a few years to get to the point where you're infested and you're using hand weed crews going through. Now these guys, this is one load taken out of this field. Palmer, if you pull it up and drop it in the field and there's moisture, it'll reroot. It'll reroot from the roots, and it'll also root down the nodes going up that plant. So if you drop a 4-foot plant, you're going to have probably 20 plants come up off of every node, and it becomes a bigger mess. They go on to produce seed heads and a bunch of seed. So we recommend load them up, take them out of the field, throw them in the woods. Some guys pile them at the edge of the field, burn them, maybe have a cold one and celebrate a small victory. How can this happen? How does this build up so quickly? So we look at susceptible versus resistant pigweed over a 3-year period. And this is really just more of a hypothetical, but going based off of data. This is assuming only 100,000 seed per plant So a quarter of what that one study showed, only 5% of the seed germinating the following year. So we're not assuming 100% germination, and about 40%, typically what we see in the field is about 40% are female, about 60% are males in any given field. So in a situation with all that considered, you start out with one female in a year per acre. You're going to give you 100,000 seed to the acre, right? Next year you're going to have about 50 that come up, right? 5%. You have, what, 200 million? Or 2 million, sorry, 2 million seed that next year, 1,000 plants, and too many for me to do math for right now, in 3 years. Seed, right? So it can build up pretty quick. That's getting 99% control. Where we have 0% control, that one female produces the same number of seed, but you have 5,000 plants that survive instead of 50. Produces more seed, right? So all of a sudden, it gets exponentially huge in a 3-year period. What we always say is you don't see resistance in the first year or two that you have it. It's about year 3 or 4. So when somebody calls me and says, I think I've got some resistant palmer in my field, it just showed up this year, typically I can say, no, it's been there a couple years, especially the way it builds up and takes off. The other thing that really caught us off guard and we weren't ready for is that resistance spread by pollen, okay? So they did a wheel and spoke type of study. They put one male in the middle, and then they put females all down these spokes, and they put them way out far. What they found is one resistant male can pollinate susceptible females over a 72-acre area, right? So it's almost like, your neighbor's cat and your cat, right? You don't want kittens, but it happens sometimes. This kind of the situation, that one male can pollinate over 1,000 foot away. And then if you get the right updrafts of pollen and movement, it could potentially be even further, right? So that, I think, jumped on us as well. We didn't know that right away. This came after a bit of research, finding out that it's actually moving quite far. So what happened in 2004, we found the first plants that seemed to be surviving glyphosate. 2005, we did a survey in the fall. Took one of those big red Atlas and Gazetteer books, usually used for hunting and fishing, and we used the grids in there and set up a sampling grid across this coastal plain. Didn't talk to farmers. It wasn't based off of phone calls saying, hey, I got resistance, come look at it. We just sampled a bunch of plants, tested them in the greenhouse, and we found resistance over a pretty widespread area. That was when we first found it, right, 2005. 2010 followed up with the same survey. Went to 242 sites across the state. 131, about 54%, had palmer. 98.5%, basically 99%, were glyphosate resistant. In a 5-year period, we went from having resistance right in here to almost the whole the whole coastal plain and starting to move into our Piedmont region. It exploded on us, and most of it, like 95%, was also ALS resistant. Now, I know you guys don't care about cotton, and you might get sick of the handful of slides I have, but just to give a perspective, at the time, post over the top, we only had Roundup and ALS inhibitors. So we effectively lost everything post control over the top in our cotton crop. Soybeans, we only had the PPO inhibitors, unless we switched completely to Liberty Link. And North Carolina is unique. The varieties that work like everywhere else don't work for us. So Liberty Link cotton and soybeans never yielded well. So our guys never made that switch. This kind of gives a bit of the setup of our soils. I'm not a soils guy, but I wanted to point out, this is our coastal plain soils. The upper coastal plain has traditionally been peanuts, tobacco. We got a lot of sweet potatoes in this region now as well, a lot of vegetables. That palmer completely took over this coastal plain in a 5-year period. It started working into the Piedmont, but it didn't spread as fast. Now, there are a few reasons that this might be, and again, this is where I'm hoping you guys can take something from us. All right, so what are our coastal plain soils made up of? You guys have some coastal plain soils, right? Sand, right? Mostly sand. What's the Sonoran Desert probably made up of? Sand, right? It's going to be a droughtier soil. Well, when those crops are shutting down because it's hot and dry, that palmer is going to keep going. So it's going to be at a competitive advantage. Those clays typically will hold a little more water for us. But what's happened over the last few years, you guys might have heard of some of the wildfires going on in the state. It's dried out a bunch in the western part of the state, the mountains and the Piedmont. They've been going months without rain. That palmer is taking advantage of that, drier condition and really has been moving across the state. And that's really what makes that coastal plain unique, why it took over. These droughty soils, these crops and soils were predominant. We have a lot of diversity, but it's mostly broadleaf crops. Corn doesn't do well for us. We don't irrigate. There's very little irrigation in North Carolina. So corn doesn't do well. There hasn't been a lot of sorghum grown until recently. So we don't have a rotation crop to get away from these broadleaf crops. And it's a lot harder to manage palmer. Sweet potato, you can't do anything post. Cotton, we're down to just Liberty. Tobacco, nothing post besides hand pulling and cultivation. So what happens is they can get a foothold in some of these, and continuous soybeans have created a problem as well. This was something interesting I wanted to mention. This is off of that 2010 survey. What they did is they took seeds from those and actually did some genetic work. I'm not going to show you a bunch of crazy genetic numbers. I'm not going to get into that. What I want to point out is there's 5 different colors that represent 5 different, what they called biotypes of palmer when they did this. And this one probably shows it the best. That wheel, that pie chart essentially shows it's about evenly split between those 5. It's the only one like that, right? Most of them are almost solid red all across the state. So most of these have the same genetic background or similar genetic makeup. We have a few of these, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, really, that are a little different. And it just shows these are probably independent introductions or developed resistance independently of the others. These others in the red most likely got spread around, moved either on equipment, feed, what have you, right? This is interesting right here. I'm going to talk about it a bit more, but it's no secret there's PPO resistance being found. This is the region we found PPO resistance. We have a population of concern where we're looking at survivors at fairly high rates of liberty from this region as well. It's close to where we found the glyphosate resistance. If you remember the other map, it was right in here. It was one of those hot spots right next door. It's where resistance to prowl and treflan was first found, and ALS resistance as well. This is a unique area because talking to the growers in the area, there were 2 brothers that got into the shipping business. And one moved to Arizona, and the other stayed right down here in South Carolina, North Carolina border. He would ship out furniture from North Carolina for him to sell out west, and his brother would ship back vegetables to sell up the eastern seaboard, right? He'd take those vegetables, break them down into smaller boxes, throw out the waste, and the interesting thing is when the farmer was telling us this, we didn't have these results back yet, and we were just investigating the PPO resistance. And he said, and I'll do my best to remember exactly, but the way he said it is he goes, the crazy thing is is this is where Palmer first showed up in the early 70s. We never had it before that. He goes, and I don't understand it because that plant comes from Asia. And those trucks were coming from the Southwest and Arizona. And my ears perked up, and I said, wait a minute. He was bringing them from Arizona, and that's where he found Palmer, right in this area. And he said, yeah. So I explained to him that, no, it actually comes from Arizona. And what we're going to start doing is some genetic work to see if we have unique populations that were brought in over time and how that might impact resistance being developed more rapidly in this region than others. Looking at the South as a whole, I don't cover all of it, but one thing you got to notice, this is coastal plain soils, right? This is 2010. I mean, it's filled in a lot across these states, but you look at that coastal plain belt, it's common for this Palmer to establish there first and do well in these soils. Now, if it keeps coming up, you guys have these soils too, right? That's where I'd be doing my hardest scouting and hardest managing to keep it from getting established. You don't want the same problems we have and taking away your ability to manage weeds. It really basically says the same. So what are our lessons to learn from North Carolina, right? What can you guys take from us? The biggest thing overall is we got to reduce selection pressure. We got to take out these weeds so we're not using these herbicides on a lot of them, okay? So your first thought's probably multiple modes of action, and I'll talk about it. But I think the most important thing is minimizing that seed bank, okay? The more seeds that go into that soil, the more plants are coming up next year, and the more you have to control with those herbicides, the more selection pressure you have. The more pressure you put on those herbicides breaking. And we've done a good job in North Carolina pushing our herbicides to the breaking point. You don't want that to be your situation as well. We have to think whole farm. And this is really hard to do when you have a banknote to pay every year, right? You're thinking year to year, get this in, get it out. But we have to evolve how we talk about this and how we manage this. We have to think all our crops in rotation, not just the one here or one there. We've got to avoid production in our ditch banks, turn rows, and other areas. And we absolutely have to avoid seed movement. If you know you've got Palmer in a field over here, harvest it last, right? Plant it last. We have to start thinking how we can keep it from getting established, because 10 seed per square foot from one plant will change your whole production system once it builds to a level that's unmanageable. So here's one, all right. This is looking at rotation and good control on the rotation crop. I asked the last group what they thought might be the difference here. All right, so this is all soybeans in 2009 treated the same. So what would be going on here? You guys have any idea?
Corn in the other half.
Right, that's a possibility. Any other ideas? Possibly sorghum. Any other practices? Anything else going on maybe?
Tillage.
Possibly tillage. So basically they all roll together, right? The year before, this was soybeans here, and this was tobacco. So the hand crew goes through and weeds it. They do till it more. It is a crop where we can manage it better, like corn or sorghum would be, right? So because they manage tobacco because of the value and actually cash crop, maximum yields, sending a crew through there multiple times, they actually, in 1 year, kept that pressure down so much when he came back the next year, did the same herbicide program over the whole field. I mean, you can't even tell there's soybeans there, can you? I mean, and the crazy thing is, he did that whole field the same. Same herbicides, everything, all done the same in 2009. So it just shows how quickly we can put a dent in Palmer if it gets to unmanageable levels, but it's going to take a lot of money, right? So I can tell a farmer how to get from this to that in about 3 to 5 years, and I'll tell you a few of the things in a bit, but you're going to be spending about $150 a year or more on weed control to get this to that. Here's another one, a rotational study. This was set up a few years ago by a county agent in Johnston County. This grower had been growing either continuous cotton or soybeans. We'd like to grow them back to back, right? Sandy soils, they don't grow corn very well, and so a lot of times it's what they call sorry land. It just doesn't grow a lot of other crops real well. So anyway, he convinced this guy after cotton to plant soybeans on one half and sorghum on the other. He planted the whole thing to wheat in the winter, treated it all the same, came back and planted it all to soybeans the following year. When they harvested the wheat, this is the picture he sent me. This is where he had the grain sorghum the year before. This is where the soybeans were. Everything green in that field is Palmer Amaranth. That all came up while that wheat was drying down. We ran the combine through the field. I got these pictures flip-flop. This is where the sorghum was the year before. This is where it was soybeans following soybeans. I think we could all unanimously say we'd rather be riding a combine in that field, right? You can see these shadowy looking things are all Palmer sticking up. He managed this field the same the whole year, right? Everything the same, pre, post, everything. The only difference was sorghum the year before. Even the winter weeds, where it was soybeans followed by soybeans, you could see a difference. A lot cleaner where there was sorghum the year before. And yield was different as well. About 11 bushels. Like I said, it's sorry land. We're not doing great on soybean yields. This is actually probably fairly good for this area. 27 on the side where he did sorghum in the rotation. So just rotating made a huge difference on Palmer population as well as the yield. I'd like to say it's all weeds. I forgot to mention this last group. There was a nematode problem as well, and that sorghum actually beat back the nematodes quite a bit also. Another thing, looking at the whole system, is post-harvest management of Palmer. This is actually a cornfield that was harvested. We typically harvest August, September, so we can grow an amazing Palmer crop after corn's out. You can see how, there's a lot of fields, especially 2005, 6, 7, 8, when it was first getting established, we would get amazing Palmer control in corn. If you deal with it, you know we can manage Palmer in corn. But after that corn dried down and we took off the crop, we'd move on to our other crops and forget about the corn. It's the same with any other crop you harvest earlier than the others. That Palmer can come on, and that's putting out seeds. That's increasing that population quickly. So our guys weren't managing it behind corn initially. And we did a little work. Gramoxone is great in the summertime on Palmer. So that's our best product as a post-harvest treatment. 2,4-D dicamba only work well if they're small or you use really high rates. So, spraying them small is better. But typically, you're only going to notice this when it's too late, unless you're set up ahead of time. So the gramoxone is the best option, and we like a residual in there to hold it through the rest of the season. And like I said, it's not just corn. Our guys that grow vegetables and stuff, we recommend that as well. What's happening here, if we effectively manage the number of plants we have and reduce them, Palmer doesn't stay viable for a long time. We look at a lot of our weeds, and you talk about, life or 1 year of seeding is a lifetime of weeding, right? Lamb's quarters. We talk about velvet leaf, all those, right? They're going to stick around for a long time. Again, some work out of Georgia, what they showed is they buried these and dug them up every 3 months, up to 2.5 years, right? And essentially, there was a rapid decrease in the viability of those seeds. At 2.5 years, only about 20% were viable. Once you get out about 4 or 5 years, you're down about 5% are viable. Now, if it's 5% of 10 million, that's still a lot of seeds, but with consistent management and keeping them from going to seed every year, we can reduce that population down near zero. It'll be expensive, and that's why I put this up here now, right? If you can avoid getting to this point where you've got to bring the population down, weed them early, it makes a huge difference.
You know how deep they, on that experiment, how deep they were?
I want to say they buried them, well, it was 4 different depths. And I think they started at about 2 or 3 inches and then buried them down to like maybe 8 to 10 inches, somewhere in there. But that's just averaged over those depths. What they found essentially was there wasn't much difference. If they're buried, they respond about the same. If they're on the surface, we get rid of them a lot faster. Any other questions I should have mentioned? Stop me as I'm going along. Yeah.
Do you get flushes though?
Yeah. So we'll get flushes of Palmer. Basically, I'll even see Palmer coming up in March. And then there'll be Palmer coming up now still. As long as there's warm weather, it'll come up. It's amazing how fast. I've seen Palmer that tall, about 2 inches, with about a little 1/4 inch seed head. They can put out, they're probably only getting 20 seeds on there, but 1 to 20, it just reproduce that quick. It's not real common, but we do see flushes throughout the year. Any other questions? I can talk all day, as you guys can probably tell. I'll be happy to talk about what you want instead of what I want to talk about. Like I said, here's my pitch on the don't depend on a single mode of action. Use multiple modes of action in a crop, strong pre or pre-plant, and then using those rotations is important. Use full rates, don't use cut rates. That includes sequentials and tank mixes. Be timely on the post, like I mentioned before. It can jump up to 8 inches in a couple of days. Don't still spray that low rate on those bigger weeds. You got to get out there early. We've shifted to telling our guys to spray when scout and find them when they're small, and then go out and spray, and you'll probably be on time. Because no matter how you try to cut it, that's not a 4-inch Palmer right there. I mean, seriously. Starting clean is important. If that Palmer is there when the crop comes up, you're fighting a losing battle. You'll never get ahead. And then work with it, everything else we can. We got to use the whole set of tools, not just herbicides. So what we've done in cotton, and this is really where some of our changes have come in, we need an aggressive pre-plant or pre, because if you don't get pre, there's no salvage post. Okay? In our Roundup Ready cotton, we do have in our Liberty Link cotton, we do have Liberty as an option, but there's a single mode of action, and we're reluctant to rely on it. This just shows the power of a good pre-residual. This is a weak pre, and here's a strong pre. Everything else after the pre is done the same. So the differences in these photos is just this is a better product up front than this product over here. I'm going to skip that because you probably don't care about cotton. The other crowd, I think, fell asleep during that one. So this one, even though this is cotton products, this shows how well they last for 40 days. You're not going to be at 100% control, especially down our way, at 40 days, but Valor and Reflex, you guys can use these in some of your crops as well, labeled in soybeans and some veggies. They're the best. That's our strong pre-programs, right? Diuron is one, Diurex that can use in some other crops as well. That's kind of a close second. And then down here you get into the prowls, the yellow herbicides. Prowl, treflan would be similar, sonlan. So this would be our weak pre. It's not to say they're not good products for other situations, but they aren't products we want to set up a successful program for Palmer Amaranth. Whether you're talking about soybeans, cotton, or veggies, if you can use a strong one like Valor or Reflex, it's going to set you up for better success going into the season. We like having another residual early post. So come in before those Palmer get established and come up and put out another residual. If you have an effective post herbicide, mix one of these in as well. We never spray without having a residual in the tank if we can help it. And then in cotton, a lay-by is a post-directed application. It makes all the difference. This is just a check. Nothing was sprayed at lay-by. These were all sprayed over the top post. Actually 3 applications of Liberty. Here's a non-residual lay-by, so it just killed what was emerged. No residual activity, and that's the difference a residual in the tank makes. So we really stress these residual products every time we go in the field. And really, it's these overlapping residuals. Cotton, soybeans, sweet potatoes, sorghum, we push it as well. We want something strong pre-plant if you're in a no-till situation in a burn down. Typically, that's where we would put the Valor. Come back with something else pre-emergence. In soybeans, we're typically looking like at a dual or a residual. Come back with a residual post. Typically, that's Warrant or dual again. And then if we come back later, cotton would be a lay-by, soybeans over the top. Try to put a residual in there if we can. What happened is, after 2010, no matter how good the weed scientists were in North Carolina, we couldn't stop it spreading. It moved on up. And what was interesting is, when I first started in 2011, I gave a talk up here near Winston-Salem. And there's a crowd about this size. I was talking about resistance. And if you remember the 2010, it was basically just here, the coastal plain and southern Piedmont, not up here yet. And about half of the room was asleep. The other half was on their phones. Kind of hurt my ego, I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh, come on, I'm talking about resistance. That's supposed to be everybody's, everybody cares. I had 3 different guys come up to me afterwards, said about the same thing. One even patted me on the back. He said, son, you're a fine speaker. You'll probably do a good job in this position, but you missed the mark with this crowd. We're better farmers up here than those guys down there. I was like, what? I couldn't hardly believe that came out of somebody's mouth in North Carolina. 2 years later, we were doing a field day in a Palmer-infested soybean field in that county, about 5 miles away. They changed their tune real quick. So I guess the moral of that story is it doesn't matter how good you think you are at farming, Palmer doesn't care. It's an equal opportunity weed. 2015, basically Palmer took over northern Piedmont, spread to the rest of the coastal plain and our organic soils. We found PPO resistant Palmer in that area I was telling you about right there, where it meets with South Carolina. And then this year, we've been getting reports and investigating it all throughout the coastal plain. We've got guys, and I can't stress enough, if it's PPO resistant, I don't care if Cobra or Blazer are hotter than Flexstar or Resource, they won't kill it. I got guys that were like, hey, I sprayed Prefix when they were small, and that Palmer kept going, so I came back with some Flexstar, and I spiked it with Reflex, and beat up my beans bad, but the Palmer kept going, so I came back with Blazer, and it still didn't kill it. Should I spray Cobra? And I was like, no. I mean, it's not going to change, and it won't. We've even looked at, I can show you research if you guys need it, but we tank mix stuff. Even we put Flexstar with Blazer and Cobra in one tank and didn't kill that Palmer. We killed soybeans. You can kill soybeans with that mix, but not the Palmer. I want to mention water hemp because this is one that's moving into North Carolina we didn't know about. It's also smooth like Palmer, similar leaf shape, but a shorter petiole. Okay, a little bit glossier leaf. It's going to be a little bit longer and skinnier in my experience, and then a single seed head panicle, more similar to red root or smooth, but it'll still have these a little bit longer branches off. And it does have male and female plants like Palmer as well, although not quite as prickly on that female seed head. The reason I bring it up is I got these pictures last year where these plants were burned out. The guy said, "What is this?" And I could tell right away that's not Palmer, it's not red root. I went up and looked at the field. You could see these long, thin leaves. It was water hemp. And as I got talking to the farmer, I was trying to figure out where it came from. You know, any new equipment, any fertilizer, anything being spread there, right? Nope. Been doing the same thing. Nothing. And we went round and round for about 45 minutes in the field, rode back to his shop, and I was asking some more questions like a good extension guy. Still couldn't figure it out until this one hired man come by. And when I asked, so you haven't gotten any new equipment, any used equipment? And the farmer's like, no. And the hired hand goes, well, yeah, what about that combine? And I was like, oh, combine? I go, when did you get that combine? He goes, well, I don't know why that'd make a difference. I go, well, when did you get it? He goes, well, about 4 years ago. I was like, okay. The first year he brought it up, right? So about that 3-year threshold for noticing resistance. Turns out he bought it out of Southern Illinois. If you guys know anything about water hemp and resistance, that is like ground zero. So that showed up. So I showed these slides last year, and it, where we first found it was up there. I showed these slides. That was the first documented instance of water hemp in the state. This year, I got 6 or 7 confirmed sites in the upper Piedmont, all glyphosate resistant, all PPO resistant. Pretty sure they're all ALS resistant as well. I still have no idea where any of this came from because I haven't had the smoke and gun combine yet. But they're all different farmers, about a 3 or 4 county area, and that one is one that's creeping up on us quick. I'm going to cruise through these because I realize this is about like a weed scientist vacation slideshow. Here's your dead weed, here's your half-live weed, here's your live weed, here's another dead weed, half-live. Okay, so they're all about the same. But what this shows is as resistance is coming in, this is PPO resistance. If you guys have resistant Palmer moving in, you probably will just see them all survive. But if you have a population where selection is going on, you'll see this. A dead plant next to one that you can see where this got bronzed. Even the soybeans got beat up, right? This Valor Pre, the Palmer came up with the soybeans, so he sprayed prefix when those soybeans were unifoliate pushing first trifoliate, and we came out a week or 2 later. You could see, dead one, live one. This is a tube of chapstick to show how small those weeds are I've been showing you. I've been zoomed in on them quite a bit. That should have died, right? That's dead, that's alive. You can see how small those soybeans are. The patches in the field hold true for about any resistance moving into an area. This is probably where a female plant went through the combine or dropped the seeds in this area. Here's one, probably went through the combine and spread seed going down towards the tree line. With that being said, the rest of the field looked like this. It was about a 100-acre field wrapped up. Had a grad student spray every PPO labeled. Came back a week later. There's our non-treated. Here's PPO treated. You might say, that looks better. But there's Palmer everywhere in there. I don't care what PPO inhibitor it was or what rate we sprayed. It survived everything. We took it back to the greenhouse, sprayed them again. It survived everything. We also have a population or a biotype of Palmer that is surviving 2 pounds of atrazine in the greenhouse. So we're probably going to confirm that one as well. We also have a population of concern, like I said, that's surviving pretty high rates of liberty. We're concerned the resistance there isn't going to be target site, it's going to be metabolism if we confirm that at all. I want to show this. This is out of our Ag Chem manual. It's just an efficacy table. This is Palmer, and this is just showing the herbicides we can't use. All our grass herbicides, glyphosate, ALS, now PPO resistance. That leaves Liberty, right? And where we're at, we got Liberty, growth regulators, and the HPPDs post, our residuals up front or over the top in a tank mix. There's a couple groups investigating populations of concern to Liberty. We know there's waterhemp resistant 2,4-D, HPPD resistant Palmer, and Arkansas in 4 generations. So 3 generations treated with a reduced rate of dicamba, they selected for resistance. So in 4 generations, they selected for dicamba-resistant Palmer in the greenhouse. We don't have a silver bullet left, and that's why we need to be employing these other measures. So I ask you, as you get Palmer moving in, is that Palmer? Is it resistant? And really, do you want to risk it, right? I'd be out there pulling that thing in a heartbeat. So I've eaten up most of the time. Need a little levity after a sobering talk like that, right? Any questions? I appreciate your attention. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's a good question. So what she was asking is, how would Liberty beans fit for Palmer and the dicamba beans, right? And so they're both going to be tools. And you mentioned dicamba as a residual, and I'll go on record here, and I don't know if anybody from Monsanto wants to beat me up out back, but dicamba is not a residual product. I wouldn't count on any residual activity. You can see some residual at times, but it's not. If I put it on that chart, it would be below prowl, in my opinion, okay? So I think it'll be good in a burn down situation if you have emerged Palmer, or probably more likely with horseweed and other winter annuals. It's good post if you're timely, and it's not going to be any better than the PPO inhibitors or Liberty. So dicamba, 2,4-D, Liberty, and the PPO inhibitors, you've got to spray that Palmer when it's 2 to 3 inches tall. If it gets 5 or 6 inches, if you're living right, you'll get the majority, but there will always be escapes. So what I would love to see, but we can't live in a world of harmony with these seed companies. I mean, I know a lot of you guys probably are seed guys, but there's nobody that's going to recommend grow my Extend beans this year and Liberty beans next year. It's really hard to get that rotation going, but if we could set that up, that would be ideal. Once the Liberty Link trait gets into them, in cotton, it's already there, and Liberty plus dicamba or Liberty plus 2,4-D looks amazing. That's the best thing to do, is those in a mix. Soybeans, we don't have that yet, so don't recommend it this year or next year. Did that? Okay. Any other questions? I'll stick around for a bit, so if you want to catch me in the hall. Thank you.